on the Deep Cover podcast is my guy. He is on the episode earlier when I first started this podcast. Aaron B. Aaron is the host of Tacos and Touchdowns Live, TNT Sports, and also a contributor for Hook'em Headlines, covering the Texas Longhorns in all aspects and ways. If you are super into that program, so Aaron, thanks for joining me on the pod again. How's it going?
It's going well, Omar. I appreciate you for having me on the show. I'm excited to talk about some Cowboys and offensive line, so I can't wait.
Yeah, so Aaron kind of told you what we're going to be talking about today. No, you're good. You're good. I was messing. So, yeah, Zach Martin retired recently, and anybody that's watched the Cowboys over the past decade is probably familiar or have heard his name. He was kind of constantly mentioned as some of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. And as he's retired, I kind of want to reflect a little bit on his career. I also want to talk about the Cowboys as a whole because they're always kind of a topic of conversation. And also just want to get into the offensive line position. I tend to feel it's so highly valued as a unit, but so undervalued on an individual level. It's just like when you talk about the great offensive line, just like this team had a great offensive line, even like the Cowboys of the 90s, best offensive lines ever. You talk about them as a unit. You don't talk about each individual player. So, which is interesting because each position, guard, tackle, center, whether you're left side, right side, requires vastly different skill sets. So we get into all of that, but I want to start with Zach Martin. So obviously, this guy is a Hall of Famer, right, Aaron? Yeah, I mean, first ballot, more than likely. So 9 Pro Bowls, 7-time All-Pro. I guess, do you agree that he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, first of all?
I agree he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. It's just due the what's it called, the committee, I believe, like when it comes to linemen, because offensive linemen usually wait a little bit because, they try to get the skill positions out of the way, or a couple of coaches that have been waiting for a while. But I agree he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I looked up a stat last night. One of the things in his 11 years there, he only had 7 career holding penalties in his whole career. It's just this is how disciplined of an offensive lineman. I know that sounds crazy, but a lot of offensive linemen when you see they'll have like 7 penalties in 4 or 5 games, but you see a guy that had over a decade career do stuff like that, and he was just a technician in his game. He valued his craft when it became a right guard, because he was a left tackle at Notre Dame and got converted to a right guard. I don't think people remember that. And the crazy part is Jerry Jones wanted Johnny Manziel, but everybody else was like, no, we're not going to go with Manziel. We're going to lean on Martin. He said, all right. And it was the best decision we did in our decades as an organization in these 2000s, is going with the Zach Martin thing. If we went with Johnny Manziel, we would be like, what were we thinking?
Yeah, it's and a lot of people say that like it's just a throwaway thing, right? Going from one, switching sides from left to right, 2, going from outside to inside, and it's just like it's a huge adjustment, And I don't really think there's much of a comparison for any other position. Like the closest thing I could think of is if you're like a QB that was in a 5-wide spread them out offense, and then you switch to something like power run pro style, and it's just like it's the concepts are different, the skills are different, So to be able to kind of fashion this kind of a career after you were a left tackle and now you're a right guard is just insane to me, right? And like to talk about like the penalties that you mentioned, like think about like Jawan Taylor for the Chiefs, right? Like he was always the topic of conversation, just kind of jumping too early, jumping too soon. It takes a lot of discipline, and that unit has to work harmoniously 60, 70 times on a Sunday, which again is something that nobody really considers. It's just part of it, It's just part of playing offensive line, and like you don't think about all that. When you kind of think about how Martin is going to be remembered as a Cowboy, I think a lot of franchises, I think the Cowboys are one of them, measure your success in addition to your team success. Michael Irvin is highly regarded as a receiver because they won all those Super Bowls in the 90s, right? Maybe he's not as highly regarded if they don't win any, right? So considering the fact that he has played on this team that has had regular season success, but has struggled in the playoffs, how do you think Cowboy fans feel about him now that his career is over?
Yeah, even though he didn't win a Super Bowl ring, as Cowboy fans, we highly valued what he did for this team. Is like when it go into the season, you're always worried about a certain position. But when Zach Martin was still on the team, you're like, oh, Zach Martin is great. He's going to do what he's got to do. It's just we always said, I would hope that before he ends his career, he at least gets a ring, because there's a lot of players in these past 20, almost 30 years that didn't get the opportunity to get a Super Bowl ring. And everybody wanted him to get that ring, like a Travis Frederick or a Tyron Smith on the offensive line. And it's sad that he didn't get that opportunity to get a ring, but at least he had at least he played at a high level. I know his last season he dealt with injury, but most of the time he was always fully healthy. He was always in the best shape he could be, and he was always like, I don't want to quote Madden, but he was always our 99 guy. So he was that guy that you already know he's going to play at a high level and to take that right side and he would aid with the center or the right tackle who was like coming in the league or something like that. And he made his impact early in his career. And I think that's one thing we'll remember with Zach Martin. He's always a really good offensive lineman for this team. It's just you wish he had a opportunity to go to the Super Bowl or even in an NFC Championship. I kind of was like, you kind of wish that wasn't like the ceiling. You kind of wish, Super Bowl or bust, but it was always bust for for his whole career. We went to the second round, but never got close to the promised land.
Leave it to me to make a Giants reference here, but it's to me, it's like Saquon Barkley, right? Like, guy who's drafted high, he played really well. Obviously Saquon dealt with injuries and stuff in New York, but the team just wasn't good enough around him. Obviously, the Giants have been much worse over the last decade than the Cowboys have been, but I think they'll feel like it's similar, and most reasonable fans feel like even though he signed with the Eagles, he'd still appreciate the fact that this was a great player that we had for, a few years. And then he went on and, found greater success elsewhere where he almost broke the rushing record. So I feel like it's similar, right? It's like you remember them fondly. I do kind of wonder, though, as time goes on, how you guys will view him, because it's not like the Cowboys haven't had a lot of great offensive linemen over the years. It's not like you're the Arizona Cardinals or something, right? And it's no disrespect. I'm just to think of an awesome offensive tackle or something that played for Arizona. I couldn't think of one offhand. So, but like Larry Allen, Nate Newton, you mentioned Frederick and Smith, all these guys who have kind of come through. It's not even to mention the guys who played like back when Staubach was playing, before both of us were born. And I guess, like, how does he rank all time? When you look at those great Cowboys offensive linemen from years past.
Yeah, when you sent me that question, I was like, dang, that's a really great question. I want to give the best effort I can. And I would rank Larry Allen as number one. I know there's some Staubach people that like Rayfield Wright, who in his first 3 seasons, he was a tight end that converted to a right tackle or a left tackle. Don't quote me; he might have been a left tackle, but knowing he was a Hall of Famer. But I got to have Zach Martin at number 2. Larry Allen was just that beast. He came from a small college in California, and he just was physical, and he was an athlete as well. Over like 310 pounds. And I don't know if you remember that play when he ran down the field trying to go for a tackle on one of the defense players for the Saints. Just showing how true because everybody think offensive linemen are big and slow, but some offensive line can move faster than some of these edge rushers out here. That's just the true fact that just because they're big don't mean they can't move. But I got to have Larry Allen at number 1. Zach Martin for what he did. And then number 3, I probably have Rayfield Wright and then Travis Frederick. I know some people may say was Nate Newton and everything. But what Travis Frederick did as a center for the Cowboys for that short time, he was that cerebral mind, that center, and he was physical, that Wisconsin tough blue collar type of offensive lineman. I'm not going to try to rank all the offensive line because that would take too much of your time. But
you went further than I thought you would. So I was if you had only mentioned Newton and Allen, that probably would have been good. But because those are the two that come to mind to me immediately, right? And obviously Travis Frederick has been had an incredible career as well. Now let's kind of pivot into Cowboys. Obviously Martin is gone now. You would imagine he's honored by the team sooner rather than later, Ring of Honor, that sort of thing. So tough season, right, for the Cowboys, missed the playoffs, and Dak is injured. You got the Cooper Rush show. McCarthy's gone. You bring in Brian Schottenheimer. So I guess talking about what happened, what were your thoughts on just like how this season played out? Is it a disappointment more so because of the lack of success, or is it more just a disappointment because you feel like the team might have underachieved?
When it was just like beginning of free agency, the lack of effort, and then it was just like everybody was on 1-year deal, prove it's down to the players, to the coaches, and there was no effort of adding players. We were like, oh, hopefully these draft picks work out. And you just didn't really see hope this team was going to be a playoff team. You're like, oh, man, we still have the talent, but injuries went down. It just was the underachieving the season. And then adding the Brian Schottenheimer, everybody, I think most, when they fire a coach, you kind of have your own checklist of coaches. You're like, hopefully they hire this guy. Hopefully they don't hire this guy. But when it came to Brian Schottenheimer, it didn't really dawn to me until like the later long into the process, because I was hoping maybe we would get Aaron Glenn. He used to be a Cowboy, or Mike Vrabel. He's a nonsense defensive minded and loves to run the ball. That'd be perfect what we need. But when it came to Brian Schottenheimer, I was like, okay, I started to like the addition because where he's the coach he's been behind Pete Carroll, of course, his dad Marty Schottenheimer, and some others. And I know before then back when he was like 32, he's 50 now. He had the opportunity to become a head coach, but he said when the right opportunity. But when you heard his interview, you could see he had a passion to want to be a head coach. He wants to run the ball, but marry into the passing game. And he's adding teachers to this coaching staff that what you need for this team, because they're a young team. And there's a lot of players that are in need of development. And last year, those coaches they were just trying to keep their job. They didn't really have time to develop players and everything. But now you got these younger mix of veteran coaches that can help build this team. So when I finally looked at it and seeing who he hired, I give it a B hiring, but at first I gave it a C. I'm like, oh, we're just hiring a guy within. Hopefully it's not a Jason Garrett thing. But when you hear his interview, you're like, okay, I like this guy. He says the right things, that just can that converse into what he is as a head coach.
Yeah, a lot of times I think you value these guys who've been in good rooms, right? Like it's one of the things. I'm not saying Brian Schottenheimer is Sean McVay, but I'll use a Sean McVay example. He worked on the Shanahan staff, and when you surround yourself with these great football minds, you would hope that some of it rubs off on you. Obviously, that's like famous last words by anybody who's coached under Bill Belichick. But with him with Marty, his dad, and you mentioned Pete Carroll, those are two different type of personality fits, and a lot of people were shitting on the move, to be honest. Like, people were saying D higher, F higher, and I think a lot of it too might have been the way that like McCarthy was kind of handled at the end there, because it kind of was like in the air about whether they were going to keep him or not. And McCarthy, he's a good coach. I mean, there's no denying that, but you could also argue that they had reached a ceiling, and that ceiling was 10 wins and out in the wild card round. It's kind of shitty to say it like that, but the results are the results, right? Looking forward to the offseason now, there's a lot of question marks here, right? Drafts coming up. Obviously, before we start recording, we were talking a little bit about the combine. So first off, where do you think they're going to? What direction are they going to go in the draft?
I'll say in the first, second rounds, you may be looking at them trying to find a potential edge rusher. They are in plans of signing Osei Odighizuwa, which shouldn't stop them from signing a defensive lineman. But they've been putting the emphasis getting a running back. So you may have to look. You may be looking at Ashton Jeanty available, or how some people say it may be a reach. But I'm looking at the film now with Amari Hampton as maybe a possibility. And another guy who had a great interview. he was smiling when they talked about the Cowboys and Mikael Williams, who I seen was an edge rusher. But I think that way, but I believe they should still look at a wide receiver too. I think they may lean towards in the free agency if they were looking for, not saying a replacement for Zach Martin, but like an addition to kind of fill that need until maybe next year they may look at an offensive line but still add depth to this team because like you brought up, this team has dealt with a lot of injuries. You want to make sure you have depth. So they say they're going to quote unquote be what's it called? Selectively aggressive. I want to see it. I don't want to hear another T-shirt line. I want to see the selective aggressive transition into adding solid free agents to this team. But when it comes to this team, I think it's just looking at edge rushers, running backs, receivers. So it's going to be in that front. But I wouldn't be surprised they went offensive line if the best one is available or so, like a Kelvin Banks or maybe a Will Campbell or some other guys. Or if Josh Simmons of the Ohio State, if his injury clearance is good, that could be a possibility too.
Yeah, it's a really good running back draft, right? That's what everybody's been saying. There's very deep at running back, so you wonder, maybe. Obviously Genti is like the splashy pick, right? Like everybody watched him in the playoff. Everybody, was watching him kind of chase Barry Sanders' record this past season at Boise State. But, with how deep the draft is, I feel like you could probably prioritize a different position in round one.
Yeah.
Receiver, on the other hand, really weak this year, which has not really been the case for like a number of years now. Like all the great receivers in college this year were freshmen. It's kind of crazy. Like Ryan Williams at Alabama and
Jeremiah Smith
at OSU. So yeah, problems, right? But they're freshmen. Like you got Ibuka coming out from Ohio State. He's probably one of the higher rated wide receivers. I always wonder if they go free agency for that position, just because it's a little bit of a weaker draft for that, and you need a decent second guy next to CD, right? So, I guess moving on, obviously two big question marks for the Cowboys this year is Dak coming back from an injury. He's had a few now, and he's lost a step or two, right? He's not the mobile guy he was when he first came into the league, more of a pocket passer and run to create space for the throwing lanes type of guy. And there's the Micah Parsons contract stuff, right? So obviously, you would imagine maintaining an elite edge rusher would be top priority. Yeah. Do you think there's any scenario where he's not on this team come the fall?
I believe he's going to be on this team, and just hopefully they don't longer, like how they did with CD, wait until the end of training camp. We're going to sign it, like get the deal done. He said he wants to get this deal done so we could add players. I don't know what's up with this team when it comes to they trying to win the deal. Like, you win the deal if the player is still a great player that plays at a high level. Like, right. The cap's going to go up, and the cap can be altered. There's teams that be in the negatives, and they figure it out. They could do the same thing. Just get these contracts done, restructure DAX, restructure the CD, and do some other things. I want to give a whole laundry list of things they could do, because most time they'll do their own thing. So that's how the Cowboys do. But that's why I was kind of liking the Schottenheimer, what he was saying. Like, you need to establish the run game where you don't put Dak in the scenario where he's got to throw 40 throws a game. Just minimize that, so where you could run the ball efficiently, get a good running back, running back rotation, so you wouldn't have to put it on Dak where he had to be throwing the ball and getting hit or not hit. Or that's another thing. You got to worry about what happens if Dak's out. Who's the next guy? Because I like Will Grier, but he's not QB2. He's kind of that veteran QB3 guy. So I think that's probably on my other list, is who's the lead backup quarterback for Dak.
Listen, man, I watched Will Grier a ton at West Virginia, and he can make throws, right? It's like You're not in the NFL if you can't make some throws, but the decision making has always been his problem. Sticking to the ball too long. And that was in the Big 12, and where defense at that point in time was optional. And so it's like he's a backup. It's okay. It's not like it's fine. I think they're going to have to think about the future here. Obviously, it's not this year because the QB class is just so weak. Like Jackson Dart's been kind of going up the draft boards here. I think you had shared like a reel or something on Instagram about him just like rocketing it at the combine. And guys like him, they're going to climb up the board because, if you like him enough to draft him in round 2, you're probably going to draft him in round 1 to get that extra year of team control. But there's 3 guys really. It's him, Cam Ward, and Shedeur Sanders. And if you're not going to be in a position to get any of those 3 guys, then there's no point, and then you're like looking at like Will Howard or Kyle McCord later in the draft. It's like, again, project backup type guys. Looking at kind of like the NFC East, there was a lot of issues here going on with the Cowboys, a lot of uncertainty with the draft, obviously, new coach coming in, new staff, new scheme, and you've got a quarterback coming back from injury. You got to rebuild your offensive line, and you got to rebuild this running back room to establish that run game. So when you look at the division, obviously, like the Giants are kind of off in no man's land, and they're probably going to be 4th in the division again. But the Eagles, just coming off a Super Bowl win, always aggressive, always looking to acquire new players. I wouldn't be surprised if somehow they end up with Myles Garrett. They're just what the Eagles do. They're aggressive. They're like the Rams and Eagles. I feel like they'll make moves. They'll get aggressive. Then Washington is coming off its best season in decades with Jalen Daniels, and they just acquired Deebo Samuel. So Kingsbury's still there. So that offense is probably going to be humming in year 2 of Daniels. So where do you think the Cowboys stand here? Can they, in some way, compete for this division? Are we kind of looking at maybe like a 500 type season?
And I was thinking that, like you said, both the Eagles and the Commanders, they've been aggressive. They even interviewed Magic Johnson and other owners. They're like, "Hey, we just hire the guys and they do their thing, and that's all." Because on our hand, everybody the Joneses got to be hands on. They don't really have other guys that are doing the thing. When it comes to this, I think it's gonna be between the Giants and the Cowboys. Who's gonna be the number 3 spot? Because unless I see some moves the Cowboys do to make them at least be over the Commanders, because the formula is you got to have a solid above average running back. At this moment, we don't have it. You need to have a wide receiver too, because most teams you got to have a wide receiver too, because when you do scouting reports, you're like, oh, okay, we got to worry about this guy, and we got to worry, and don't sleep on this guy. Like your third receiver, he could be decent, but you want your wide receiver too to be kind of a fringe between. He could be a wide receiver somewhere else, just in case of CD's out. You like Jalen Tolbert, but you're not saying this is your wide receiver too. You need to look at wide receiver too, and the defense. You got to have a really good defense. You've seen what the Eagles did. They had basically the Georgia Bulldogs on the front 7, and they have developed into Vic Fangio had them like running loose on that defense and having a good quality secondary. So that's the formula. I hate to quote the Eagles, but they won the Super Bowl, so you can't hate greatness, even though it's your rival and everything. So I think that's the main focus is making sure this defense is a above average defense, establishing a solid running back and getting a receiver. If this team doesn't do that, they're going to be that, like you said, they could just be a 500 team, or they could be slightly above 500. But this is not a team like, okay, we're going to playoffs because there's no proof of it. That's just a sad fact.
Yeah, and again, to use the Eagles, they're kind of the formula is simple. You play at a high level program, we're interested. And that's what they did. It's like, oh, okay, I don't care about the off the field stuff with Jalen Carter. Played at a big time program and excelled there. We're gonna get them. You played at Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or something. They're probably looking at you. And the receiver thing again. Like the Eagles, to use them belabor the point here, but they got Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. The Bengals were a good team who probably could have a bounce back year. They're trying to maintain T. Higgins because then they'll have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. It's just kind of like, you kind of want to have that second guy who could do some things. And it doesn't have to be like amazing. Like you look at like Seattle, for example, obviously DK Metcalf is like the big name guy, but they get Jackson Smith and Jigba, and they have Tyler Lockett still doing this thing over there. And so there is value in having a second guy that isn't just like a glorified wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type guy, right? Which is important. And it's going to be interesting because like for the longest time, it seems like The NFC East has been kind of like who knows kind of division, but it's kind of feel like it's trending. Like this could be a two-way battle between the Commanders and the Eagles for a while here. And so if you're the Giants and the Cowboys, you're on the outside looking in, and you got to figure out like, all right, what do we got to do here? Because we can't end up just only winning 4, 5, 6, 7 games here and expect to keep our jobs. That's the pressure that comes with it.
Yeah,
especially when you're in Dallas, right? It's a national brand. I feel like Dallas, Pittsburgh, Raiders, they all have that same kind of pressure. They're national brands. They're a lot huge fan bases, and they're like pillar brands as well for the NFL. So, it's going to be an interesting season for the Cowboys. I do want to talk here though about this offensive line stuff. So, what really wanted to spark this conversation, this topic for me, Aaron, is Bills left tackle Deion Dawkins. He had a quote recently where he was saying, we should have something that dictates who the best offensive lineman was, like an award, because obviously an offensive lineman isn't going to win MVP. It's never going to happen. I mean, I have my own feelings about MVP as an award. It's basically who's the best quarterback, and that's what it's turned into. Like, personally, if I was voting for MVP, I probably would have voted for Saquon this year, but, I don't have a vote. But my opinion is a little
irrelevant.
That'd
be nice, though.
That would be nice to have a vote, yeah. But, yeah, it's like, everyone's like, oh, is that going to be Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson? And kind of like Saquon was like this afterthought after he almost set a record. It was just kind of crazy to me, right? Like, how is it not acknowledged? But that's what MVP has become. But, Dawkins was saying, we should have an award to be able to kind of, so when you look back in the history books, you could say, hey, this guy won best offensive lineman 2 or 3 times. He must have been fucking dominant, and I think like somebody like Zach Martin would have won that award multiple times, more than likely. And they do it in college, right? Like every position is named after somebody and has an award, right? Like Davey O'Brien Award for the best QB, the Broyles Award for the receiver. It's like every single one has an award. And do you think that the NFL should implement something like that so that these guys get acknowledged on an individual level more so than just the team success?
Yeah, absolutely. They're the unsung heroes of the offense. Like you never see anybody. You do see occasional somebody wearing a lineman jersey, but it's not like the thing you see at your local or your pro shops or something like that. You always see your running back, wide receiver, but those are the guys that are blocking. So those running backs and quarterbacks have the opportunity to make big plays. Like when you think of Hall of Fame, you basically got to go deep dive into, okay, how's this offensive lineman great? And if you have that award, you could add that as an addition to their resume. And it should be on there, like you said. The college football acknowledges the offensive lineman. They acknowledge the walk-ons that were in college. Why haven't there been an award for an offensive lineman? It boggles me that it should have been there a long time ago. Because there's been a lot of great offensive linemen that could have been acknowledged to be the best offensive lineman. But now we're kind of basing, okay, we got to look at PFS stats, but that's still kind of hard to figure out because there's not that much stats on there. But if you went by like a committee of like, the NFL players and everything, because their defensive linemen say, okay, that guy right there, he always gives me hell every time I play. And there's in that factor as well. But I think the offensive lineman definitely should have an award for sure.
When you talk about the stat thing, it makes me think about the NBA, right? Because like analytics obviously is almost like a dirty word, for a lot of like old school NBA people. But what it has done, it's brought about these new type of stats that give you a little bit of a better understanding. And this isn't super important when you're talking about like in the now, but like 15 years from now, if we're looking back and saying, okay, how do I know this left tackle was actually good? And yeah, you could look at the raw sack numbers, but again, that's a unit number, right? That's not really an individual. Like if you're a left tackle, you're engaged with the edge rusher, and they get a blitz from the right side. That's probably not your fault. It's just like it's a unit thing. So I feel like there's an opportunity to develop more of these deeper stats. Like when I do research for some NBA articles. It's like, oh, good pass to bad pass ratio for like a point guard. That's a super specific step, but what does that tell you? It's like if the number's high, oh, they take care of the ball pretty well. They make good decisions. They're a good point guard, right? And so for this, so could it be like length of block? Obviously, penalties is a big one, right? Is it, if there's like, obviously with all the advanced like Amazon cloud analytics they could probably have like blocking force when you're blocking for the run. I just feel like there's, you could probably measure the hole that they create, when you're kind of filling the gap in that way, so I just kind of think that there's really a missed opportunity here to use analytics and use all these numbers and these 5 million camera angles that we have to be able to say, hey, this is what this guy does well. And again, we do it for quarterbacks. We do it for running backs. Like running backs, we have, stuff about their speed going on a breakaway, yards after contact, all this different stuff that measure the success of a running back outside of just touchdowns and wins. And I just feel like we've done offensive linemen a disservice there. And so I guess, do you think that that's something that us as a football community should kind of maybe focus on a little bit more?
Yeah, we should definitely focus more on like how you brought us some great points, and you should probably get a pad on it because you brought us some great. They don't. It's always about, like I keep bringing up. They always bring up the quarterback and wide receivers. They need to look at this why is this offensive lineman successful? What are the traits that makes him great? Like they don't really go into a deep dive. There's like a small community that are former offensive linemen or just were fond about the offensive line, but you never hear pretty much on TV shows about how great this offensive lineman until like they're retired or they passed away or something like that. Why don't we give them their roses now while they're still playing? Yes, we talk about, there's a couple of them you see on TV, your Jason Kelsey's and everything. But there's only like a couple of those guys you pretty much talk about, but you don't. When it comes to the offensive line, you definitely they need more appreciation because they do a lot of great things for offense. And you can break down which, like your left tackle, your left guard, your center, your right tackle, they all have a certain a role on that offensive line that they do. Like the center is the quarterback of the offensive line. Right. He's got to know the plays on their side, and they got to know, okay, hey, he's pointing to that middle linebacker. He's about to blitz. He's letting the right guard or the left guard know the player, and then because the center pretty much can't not know what the play is because he's about to snap the ball, and then he's got to put his hands right on that one tech or something like that. So,
and even that could be a stat. Yeah. Right, Aaron, like think about how we look at quarterback attempts and completions, right? How is that not the same thing? Yeah. Like you say, oh, Mike linebacker here is going to come in on a blitz. He points that out. Yeah. That's an attempt. All right, if the Mike linebacker comes, that's a successful prediction, right? And I think so you could kind of do that sort of thing, like we do it with other positions, right? We talk about like, all right, when this wide receiver runs this in route, this is the success rate. When he runs a fly route, this is the success rate. DBs, we look at passes defended. How many times were they thrown to? Which again tells us a lot because like the biggest example of that was Darrelle Revis, who was elite, best corner in the league for multiple years in his prime. But, he didn't have a lot of tackles or interception or pass defense numbers. Well, how is he the best? Because they're afraid to throw to him. So, like, it's like, that's the thing, it's just like, so it becomes a thing. Like, if an offensive lineman, his side, sees, a lot of blitzes coming from that side, that should tell you something. They're trying to attack that offensive line because you're probably pretty good. Yeah. It's just like, it's just like, I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but yeah, it's something that I feel like you could create metrics that make sense. And I sometimes think the NFL should take a little bit more from what the NBA does in that regard. And a lot of people, like old school football people, push back like, oh, I don't need all these math equations, blah, 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 blah. But, a lot of that stuff matters, because little things, right? So when you're scouting a guy in college, if you're saying, hey, in this type of, passing scheme, say they're going like a simple 4 verticals, right? And they're just kind of like, I need this guy to hold his block for X amount of seconds. And then you can say, all right, well, here's a tape of this guy from Texas. And here's this tape of this guy from LSU. Same type of plays. Let's see how long they can hold the block against similar competition. And then you can make a decision, right? Whereas if you're not using that information, then you're just like, I don't know. He benched a bunch at the combine. Sounds good. Let's just go ahead and draft him. That's the thing to me, right? And that brings me to the next thing, which is, you touched on this earlier about that they just don't get coverage, and why is that? I mean, is it the stats thing that we're just kind of going on about, or is it just kind of as simple as like it's not a glamour position, it doesn't score touchdowns like a running back, a wide receiver, or a QB?
It's all overall just a glamour. It's not a glamorous position. They're like, oh, they're just some big dudes that just push people out of the way. It's like, oh, okay, if you just have some subpar offensive linemen, see how far your running back, your quarterback goes.
Exactly.
Like if you put that into a factor, like you brought up a point, like how long can that offensive lineman hold that three tech for how many seconds so the quarterback can throw the ball, or how can he push that do a drive block or zone block where that running back can run free? Like that should be a stat. But they don't. It's like you said. It's not a glamorous position. They're not getting touchdowns or anything like that. Unless they do some little trickery play. That's
unless they're playing for the Detroit Lions. That's the only way.
Or the Chiefs.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, it's like, and you think about like this isn't the case on the other side. We're defensive linemen, right?
Yeah.
Like even inside guys. We pay attention to their batted balls. We pay attention to how many double teams they attract. Obviously on the edge, the guys we're looking at sack numbers, we're looking at TFLs. That's the big thing with the edge guys, and it's like, why wouldn't we measure like when they're running like a toss play or something like that, that pulling guard who's able to kind of lead block, right? Why aren't we focusing in on that a little bit more? And I kind of just feel like a lot of people just have this assumption where offensive linemen are just, you just mentioned it, like, oh, they're just big guys who are pushing the pile, getting people out of the way. Like, if you see some of the way that some of these guys operate, it's not that. Like, center especially is like such an intelligence required position. Like the reason Jason Kelsey was so good because he's smart, man. Like he's good. He's good at what he does. He identifies things, and they're like the first line, right? And that's why quarterbacks and centers always have super tight relationship. And if you don't have that, then a lot of times your team kind of sucks. And it reminds me of the movie Any Given Sunday, when Jamie Foxx is kind of like talking shit about his offensive linemen. What happens? They stop blocking and he gets wrecked. It's like, obviously that's a movie and that's not real life, but that kind of shows you what happens if one, you're deficient, or two, there's not buy-in with that offensive line. And yeah, I just feel it's a great disservice to the position because it is super important. It's kind of like how, like for a while in the NBA, like guys who did a lot of rebounding were overlooked, right? And until you had a guy who, like Dennis Rodman, who made rebounding cool, and then it didn't get overlooked as much, So, like one of the great examples is Moses Malone, who I believe had a brief stint with the Spurs back in his day, if I'm not mistaken. But like he, leads the career list in offensive rebounds. No one talks about it. It's because it's just offensive rebounds. Who cares? It's not points. It's not assists. And it's just like, I feel like that's kind of the offensive line situation. It's kind of like offensive rebounding in the NBA. No one really pays attention to it. It's just kind of, which is unfortunate. It's a big part of the game. Like kind of wrapping up here. So let's talk about what makes a good lineman. Obviously, there's, you got three main positions, right? You got your tackles, your guards, and your center. For those positions, what kind of traits are you looking for? I guess we could start with the two edge guys, the tackles. Like what kind of traits are you looking for a really good offensive tackle?
First off, be an athlete, have lateral quickness, awareness of knowing where that edge is coming at. He could be coming to the inside, he can be outside, and just good hand placement. If you don't have good hand placement, you're going to get a call for holding, a lot of other penalties, and just having that discipline. Okay, not to jump off sides, because that's the big thing you brought up with Taylor that played for the Chiefs. Like, you got to have that discipline to know the snap count. Like, if you don't know the snap count, you jump, your team's gonna suffer, and they got to go all the way back just for those little mental mistakes. Just having that mental mindset, and just the main thing offense is that lateral quickness, good hand placement, good punch, and you got to have ability to even pull a little bit just to get to that second level as well. Because pulling is not easy as they make it look. And you got to get low. If you're standing too high, those edge rushers could push you down, and they have enough power. It's just you got to have good hand placement, lateral quickness, good power, and as well as just having good stance. Because if you're too high, it's not gonna. Because you see that with a lot of taller guys, they have problems getting low and everything. But that's the main thing when I think the offensive tackle.
Yeah, another thing that goes kind of, again, a little underappreciated is how much the edge rusher on the other side has changed over the years. Like, for a while, it was like, you had guys like Bruce Smith, like agile guys, but they're big guys, right? And then slowly they became slimmer, faster, more moves, so now your edge rusher looks like a tight end. It's just kind of crazy, and like, so if you're an offensive tackle, you got to be able to do that. So that lateral quickness is so important. And then you think about like the way the schemes have changed with the run pass option stuff. And sidebar, one thing that annoyed me so much this year, Aaron, I don't know like if this is just me being kind of old man yelling at the cloud, but when teams would run an RPO or run pass option, and on games where Tom Brady was on the call, he would call them triple options, right?
Oh.
And he's not wrong, because you could hand it off, you could pass the ball, or you could run it yourself as a quarterback. So hence 3 options, right? But for me, when I think of a triple option, I'm thinking about the flex bone. I'm thinking about the wishbone.
Old school.
Old school stuff. Old school Oklahoma stuff. So, and it's just like, so whenever he said it, just irritated the fuck out of me. But the point is, like, on these run pass options, there has to be this awareness across the line, tackles, guards, centers, the whole thing, not to go too far, because then you end up with the whole ineligible man downfield penalty, and so you got to be awareness of where the line of scrimmage is, awareness to do that and still kind of hold your block and all that stuff. And it's so much more challenging than a lot of people make it out to be.
Yeah.
Let's move on to guard. So you work in the inside. What do you need from that guy?
The footwork is not as pointed as the tackle, but he still got to have that, and you got to have that anger, that attitude as a guard, different from the tackle. You kind of want that guy that does a little extra after whistle, but doesn't get in trouble for it. But just having power, and his main thing, definitely, they got to be the athlete as well. Be able to pull and get to that second level, to get to that linebacker, and the main thing is awareness. So like you were bringing up RPO, if they don't know where they're going, it just ruins the play. If the left guard, everybody's going this way and he's going that way. So that's the main thing. Yeah.
With the guard, man, the thing, again, it's defensive tackles much more athletic than they used to be, right? Yeah. You look at like a guy who just retired, Aaron Donald, who's going to, first ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt. The way, like, his agility and his ability to kind of command a double team and work through it. So that speed and power combo. If you're a guard, you got to meet that. Another thing you think about, most defenses now, about 65% of the time, they're running nickel, right? So they got an extra DB on the field, one less linebacker. And so if you're a guard and you're trying to run the ball, you got to get to that second level. There's a good chance you encounter a safety and not a linebacker who's a lot quicker than your average inside linebacker, right? So that becomes another thing where you're just kind of like, you have the agility and the athleticism to be able to catch these guys on the second level, so your running back doesn't get leveled, and then you're just again, it's much more demanding of a position than it was. And I guess we could close out with center.
Center. That's like I brought up. That's the
brains.
quarterback. He's the brains of the operation.
Yeah.
Not saying the guards and tackles aren't smart, because they definitely are. Like you said, all the things they got to do, but the center, he's got to do similar things where he's got to get to that second level as well in certain blocking schemes as well. And he got to make sure that snap's right. Him and that quarterback got to be best friends and everything. If the snap is off, that ball may be going this way, maybe going that way, but you want to make sure it's on the money. I know some centers like Jason Kelsey, I keep bringing up. He likes to throw it, get it off fast, so he can get his hand back and get onto that defensive lineman. So there's centers like that. Some are just kind of steady Eddie, just I got snapped and I right there. But some of them you gotta. That's the main thing, is the snap and hand placement as well, and lateral movement and there's a lot of things you got when it comes to center, because if the time is off with the ball, it's a screw play unless your quarterback's super athletic and figure something out. But you got to make sure the snap is on point. And he's the guy, like, okay, the left tackle, what play, what I need to do. The center mostly is going to say, okay, you need to go here or you need to go there. So he's the brains of the operation when it comes to center. He's got a lot of jobs to do. He's got to do it efficiently, or not. The defensive tackles will have a hell of a game, like an Aaron Donald. So.
It reminds me of, if you remember, in the regular season finale when Detroit was playing Minnesota, there was a sequence where I believe there was the Vikings on offense. So O'Connell, their head coach and play caller, is having Darnold and the center kind of figure some stuff out on the line. The counter chess move there is that Aaron Glenn on defense was having his guys doing a bunch of stuff. So you saw a lot of motion, pre-snap, a lot of movement from the defense. So if you're the center, like, you got to be able to identify all of that and make sure, one, that your quarterback isn't confused, and also make sure you guys on the line aren't confused, right? So that, like, they might be trying to shift protections or trying to audible out into a new play. And if you miss up that communication, then that's going to be a disastrous play immediately. And I think a lot of these defensive coordinators now are getting smarter, because the NFL and the game has become much more offensive centric. We all know that. And so defenses, the way they counter for that is with confusion, right? So if they want you to believe that this guy's going to drop into a cover two here, when actually he's coming up on the corner blitz and he's open, that you could get kind of confused by it. So they're going to have all these weird formations, one down lineman, it's just like, who's rushing, who's not rushing. Like, the Ravens used to do that all the time, with the one down lineman thing. Philly's done it too in the past. And, and it becomes a thing on the center. You got to identify all of that, right? And again, it's just a thing that I just feel is very underappreciated in today's game. And it's the only position that we're like that with. Maybe linebackers kind of like that now, because I feel like linebackers are a little underappreciated on the defensive side as we've gone to more nickel and dime formations. But, like, obviously everybody knows what we say about QBs. Same thing with running backs. Wide receivers and tight ends have never gotten more attention. Corners have never gotten more attention. Now safeties have kind of become the hybrid linebacker safety position as well. So, and edge rushers and inside guys get their fair due also. But we're neglecting these offensive linemen, I feel like, still, and we talked about a lot of different stuff here, obviously, Aaron. So it's a good conversation, man. I really do appreciate you jumping on here, and I knew you were the right guy to talk to, just because if I'm not mistaken, you are a former offensive lineman yourself, or was it defensive lineman? I can't remember.
Former offense and defense.
Oh, so you did both sides. Yeah. So
they switched.
So I wasn't wrong. Okay, good.
Oh, you're good.
But yeah, it's like I really do appreciate your perspective. But thanks for joining me. Obviously, we mentioned at the top, Tacos and Touchdowns Live, Hook'em Headlines. If you have anything else to plug where people could check out all your stuff at, feel free.
I appreciate you again for having me on your podcast. And you can, like you said, you can check me out on Tacos and Touchdown Live on Facebook and Instagram. I didn't get it. Still haven't switched to TNT Sports, but check it on YouTube. And also check out Hook'em Headlines. They got definitely some great writers as well on there talking about your basketball, your football. I more cover the football thing when it comes to recruiting and things that are going in the season. So definitely check out that. if you love the Texas Longhorns, you want to know more about Texas Longhorns sports as well. And check out the reels and everything. And I always try to do the breaking news, like I just did one on Debo Samuels and everything. So if you just kind of like the short tidbits of the podcast, I understand people had kind of wanted to see the 30 seconds ago. Right. Check out when it comes to we got reels and everything on there, but that's about it. Definitely gonna have a show on Tuesday discussing about the NFL Combine, so definitely check that out at Tacos and Touchdown Live on YouTube and also Facebook. But I appreciate you for having me on, Omar.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Make sure to check all that out. I will be linking all of Aaron's links and stuff into the show description so you could check him out. Again, a lot of great stuff about Cowboys, NFL at large, and the Texas Longhorns there. So we're coming off an encouraging season. You hope that Sarkisian can get them over the top here.
Yeah.
And usher in that Arch Manning era, which I'm sure will be heavily covered. So
I'm excited.
Yeah. As am I. I'm just as an observer of college football. I'm definitely excited to see what he can do down there in Austin. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. We will be back soon with another episode. Until then, see you later.